All right, we're on the Country versus Metal podcast with Bradley Prakope. Hope I
Hey,
said that right.
yeah, Prakope.
So I read a little bit about you today. So you've been doing production and engineering and recording in music for about what, close to 20 years now?
Yeah, almost 25 years.
20. Oh wow.
I actually started in high school. I kind of got into it in the last year of high school, and then went to audio school straight out of high school, and then, kind of dove right in. I quit my job at 19 and, took a gig fortunately got a gig at a mastering studio under a guy named Phil York, who's actually the guy that recorded Redheaded Stranger for Willie Nelson, at a studio called Autumn Sound here in Dallas, which is now Audio Dallas recording studio. And Phil kind of took me under his wing while I was still in school for audio, and just kind of got me started. I mean, it was kind of an amazing, fortunate circumstance where I was one of the lucky ones that found a paying, kind of entry-level job there for a minute at this studio and his mastering studio. And he kind of taught me, it was kind of a different entry point than some people, I think, because, I kind of learned things like mastering, and we were doing vinyl restoration for Sun Records catalog stuff and things like that. So I got kind of an interesting start. And then Phil actually handed me my first freelance gig. It was a rock band here in Dallas that, he was an older guy at that time. And, it was kind of a young, kind of metal, not metal, but heavy rock band. And, he was like, "Hey, you want to do this project?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so he kind of got me started freelancing. And, that's kind of where it began. And it's been a really interesting road since then, but I kind of never looked back. So, I think I was 19 when that started. So I
That's
just
cool.
turned 42.
Now, were you a musician first?
I was a drummer growing up.
Okay.
Not a great one. Played in, some garage bands, and we were doing, kind of heavy cover tunes. It was in the late 90s, and just, we wrote a few songs. We recorded a little demo at one point in my buddy's garage. His girlfriend's, or his sister's boyfriend had a 4-track, and, recorded our band in this garage. And, so yeah, I was a drummer. But the thing that actually got me into the recording side of it was actually electronic music. I kind of got into the club scene in the late 90s, and I was kind of enamored by how they were making electronic music back then. It's not some, being a drummer and, playing in grunge bands and stuff, I didn't have any understanding of the technology for electronic music. And the girl I was dating in high school, her father was a videographer. Actually, a lot of the listeners for your show may know the show that he was the film guy for. He shot and edited Honey Hole Fishing Magazine. So he had an avid video editing studio at his house when I was still in high school. And he's the one that kind of showed me, I was showing him some, electronic records that we were listening to one day. And he was like, "Well, you know how they do that, right?" And I said, No, I don't. And he opened up a program called Digital Performer, and had a keyboard set up in his studio, and showed me, played some notes, and they appeared on the screen as MIDI data. And I was just like, mind blown. I was just like, wow. And so he kind of showed me, how the, early digital recording was working, right around the year 2000. And I was just hooked. I was like, wow, that's so cool. So it's an interesting thing that kind of led me there. Wasn't really like playing in my own band, recording, or anything like that got me there. It was more through the technology and just kind of the wondering, you know, how it was all happening, you know, just not really understanding that side of it. And and I got into it originally because I wanted to, you know, keep composing music and writing music and that. But once I kind of got into school for audio, I realized pretty quickly that my strengths were more kind of on the side of helping other people make records, you know, as opposed to kind of creating my own music, you know. I've done a little bit of that, but that's, you know, I kind of fell very quickly into recording bands and helping other artists, you know, do their thing. So that was always kind of my passion place and really still is, you know.
That's pretty cool. You found it that young. A lot of people go through their whole lives just not finding, you know, what they feel like they were put on this earth to do. And that's when you said I kept thinking of like Paul Oakenfold and DJ Tiesto.
Yeah.
I walked into a place in Vegas and I was like, oh, DJ Tiesto is still out there. I was like, that's
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I still go to some electronic shows now and then, and you know, just recently I saw some of the old school, you know, things that I used to go to 25 years ago. Some of the DJs are still out playing, and you know, it's great. You know, yeah, I've always been kind of an eclectic listener. You know, I know that your background, you know, having watched a few of these, is kind of coming from the metal hard rock side of things, and that was definitely where I was kind of grew up in that as well in the mid and late 90s, you know, starting with, you know, grunge and then punk and then, you know, the heavier stuff like Deftones and Korn and, you know, even things as heavy as like Coal Chamber and Sepultura. And, you know, it's like, so I was really very much into that scene, you know, until I found the electronic thing. And then I was like, wow, this is really different, you know. I think it was
your sound just cut off.
Oh no.
All right, we're back.
We're back.
But yeah, you were saying you're talking about the harder music and things.
Yeah. Just kind of the late 90s kind of heavy stuff. You know, that's definitely my background too. At least as an early listener, you know, and kind of some of the sounds that you know, that kind of influenced my kind of energy around what I like in music and some of that stuff, you know. So, yeah.
It's funny, like I one of the things, like I always call them like soundscapes, but like that's what I loved about the Deftones.
Man,
the sonic texture of what was going on. I love that, and they replicated live too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I've never seen Deftones live. I've seen a lot of those bands, but yeah, man, Chino Marino, and I think it was a producer named Terry Date that did. I know he did Adrenaline. I'm almost positive he might have done both, Around the Fur and Adrenaline. And I mean, both of those records were just iconic to me. But yeah, so yeah, man. I mean, I never get to work on music like that, but I definitely loved it when I was, you know, young.
Yeah,
and, yeah. So
with the stuff you're focused on now, like, well, obviously you're not, you know, genre specific, but you've been doing a lot of work with the Texas country artist.
Yeah, and I would say even more so kind of in that alt Americana lane, you know. You know, I as you know, I did the Geronimo record for Shane Smith and the Saints, and you know, that was a really fun project and really just an incredible what kind of the legs that got under that project independently. It's just been incredible to watch. You know, but yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because, you know, I kind of come at working in that genre a little left of center, you know. It's like I'm always trying to do stuff that's a little outside the box for the genre, you know, because when I was a younger engineer, I worked on, you know, just because I worked at various studios in various capacities, not always as a producer, not always as anybody that had any say so. I was just kind of there to record or whatever. And, so I ended up working on a variety of Texas country and things like that. And, I sometimes I would just kind of be like, man, too much of this just kind of sounds the same. Like it's in the same lane. It's like I've heard these songs before. So it's like, when interestingly enough, when I got the call through Tim, who now goes by Tim Lightyear, but Tim was a buddy of mine before he was in the Saints. And when they went to start making that record and he was the guitar player, I think he had he had some ideas for production in that album as well, but he was kind of, pretty green as a producer at that point. And, so he called me, to record it, but knowing also that I had the, kind of the sensibility and the experience of producing a lot of, records, in big studios like that. We did that at Orb down in Austin, which is Blue October's studio, and which it's a killer room. When Tim called me to do that and put me in touch with Shane, one of the things I said to Shane like really early on was like, I was like, man, I don't have any interest in making like a down the middle Texas country record with you. I was like, I feel like you guys could be a national band and we don't need to focus on appealing to like the Texas market. I actually said that directly to Shane. I was like, I want to make a record with you that appeals to everyone. Like I want to make a genre crossing, outside the lines kind of album with you. And, they took a chance and went down that road, and clearly it paid off because, Shane is a very unique sound anyway. It's got roots influence, it's got folk influence, it's got Appalachian influence, it's got, all those 4-part harmonies. There's all kinds of things that, don't really pigeonhole it into a regional type of record or a regional type of band. And so we very intentionally, made something that was kind of not just for Texas, and and that seems to have worked because, Geronimo, thankfully had really launched him to the stratosphere, as far as growing his following and his fan base and being able to tour, all over the world. And, it's just incredible to watch. And Shane and those guys are some of the most hardworking musicians I've ever met. That's one of the things I really like about that genre, about both country and Americana, and even folk music and things like that, is it's one of those genres where, people can still put in the hard work and see the rewards, Yeah. And Shane is kind of like the crowning example of that, of an independent artist who, never took a major label deal, but is selling out Red Rocks, at this point. It's awesome. That's what everybody hopes for, and to see him pull that off. It's just, I've got a lot of respect for his work ethic and his business sensibilities and being able to do all that,
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah.
And I have to ask,
Mm-hmm.
so like the people that sell out like stadiums and whatnot, like all like the guys on the radio, they all their music, all their mixes, they all sound the same. They all sound like, like sterile and plastic. But I've heard a lot of the stuff that you recorded, and what I love about like what people like you do, like your mixes and your recordings have personality. They have feel to them. You know what I mean? Like
Thanks, man.
I feel that's really lacking in the, the stuff you hear on the radio. Like it's just really weird, and it's kind of frustrating because there are a couple people that, like I believe on the radio that like it doesn't capture the personality of their voice. It's like they all put it in like the same preset.
Hmm.
You know?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't actually like, I don't have any animosity towards commercialism. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, I find that, the record industry is so hard. And, the fact that anybody can make money doing it is just, that's like, you know, that's incredible. Because kind of that's kind of the challenge, right? Is the art versus commerce aspect of this business. People get into this business, and I got into this. Everybody I know got into this business because of passion, because of art. Like nobody initially like cared if they made any money, right? But unfortunately, because of the framework of the system that we live in the world, we've got to make money, to survive in the capitalist hellscape that we live in. And so, I honestly applaud anyone that can do that. I don't really, I don't slight people for selling out. If anything, it's like where it's like where it goes south is a lack of authenticity, right? But the thing that I have found to be true, and I haven't worked with a bunch of celebrities or anything. I don't really know a lot about that world, but the thing that I have found to be true is that the most successful records and artists that I either watch or have worked on or whatever, it's all rooted in authenticity, regardless of how commercially successful it becomes. It's rooted in authenticity because people can smell that. They have like a sixth sense about things that are inauthentic. And that's where a lot of people in my world are starting to have these discussions about the influence of AI in music. And there's all kinds of discussions going on surrounding that. But I actually I think I saw like a headline on Instagram today that somebody had built an algorithm that can tell with 100% accuracy whether or not music was created with AI.
Huh.
And I was like, wow, and I now thinking back on that, I'm like, man, I should have saved that because I'll probably never see it again. But, it's like, but I feel like, a lot of the people that are having the discussion surrounding the humanity in music are talking about, how it doesn't matter if AI can, build a song or produce a quote record that sounds whatever. It's, that there's going to be a lack of human authenticity in it because the machine, even though it can learn from humans, it doesn't have that intrinsic, soul that is the human being that, and I think that's the intangible aspect of, of art and humanity and making records. And that is actually the thing I think that drives sales, that drives success, even for the big artists. I saw Casey Musgraves at AA Center a few months ago, and I was absolutely floored at just, how authentic her performance was, how authentic her persona was, and also how just unbelievably perfect she was as a performer. It was mind-blowing, and so it's like, it's no surprise to me that there's that level of success surrounding that, because it is literally the highest, caliber of execution within, the craft of making that type of art and records, and so, um, but it really is driven, I think, by authenticity, whether that's from songwriting or just the way that an artist carries themselves, or, and I think that the artists that are seeking success and trying to mold themselves in a way to capture that, and not just doing what is perfectly true to them, that's, kind of a hamster wheel that's never going to work, and and I kind of learned that, listening and talking to some executives, and one person in particular who's a legendary radio promoter. When I was younger, like producing some artists, I came to her and I was like, hey, like if we have a budget, can we get this on the radio? And she was like, well, it doesn't just work like that. She's like, that's only part of the equation. It's like, there has to be a story, there has to be something for people to talk about, there has to be something, and usually there's a whole methodology to getting artists to that level. And I know that that's been, in a lot of people's view, largely diluted by, like, the labels chasing TikTok fame over the last few years and things like that. And, those, I don't know, because I don't follow it that closely, but it's like, I can't tell you like the statistics on how many of those turned into a one-hit wonder versus any kind of sustainable career. I don't really know. But, I know that, some of the big labels have caught a lot of flack for that being kind of their metric, as opposed to, developing people. But then you hear stories about, like what just happened with Tim, with Big Loud and Big Loud Texas. They created this Texas music division of Big Loud, which is a major publisher and record label in Nashville. And, I mean, it's like the story that everybody dreams about. I mean, what happened to him? Did he tell you guys this on the show?
I don't think so.
So like, I mean, listening to him tell me that, I just found it so interesting because, he was playing, what is that thing in McKinney? Is it Texas Music Revolution? Is that the?
I have no idea.
Yeah, well, it was like a show up in McKinney, and I think it was a festival. I think that's the one. It was just back this fall, or fall of 2024, and he was playing early in the day, maybe the opening thing. It was like at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. or something, and his band was late. And so Tim was up there on the stage by himself playing acoustic. And then, like, the guys started showing up. I wasn't there for this. This is just the story that I've been told. But the guys started showing up, and, like, the drummer walked on stage. Tim didn't stop playing, and he just kind of picked up his sticks and joined in. And then the same thing happened with the bass player, like, a few minutes later. And it's amazing because it wasn't planned that way, but it actually created, like, this really cool moment, and then they had a great set from there on or whatever. But, it almost looked like some kind of, lackadaisical musicians showing up going, oh man, yeah, look at how, we just, have that kind of carefree, we're just going to pick up and start playing vibe. Well, anyway, I don't know which person from Big Loud was in the crowd watching him that day, but it, within a few days of playing that show, he started getting messages on Instagram and people following him from Big Loud Publishing and Records. And he was like, what is going on? And then some of his acquaintances were like, hey, so-and-so's trying to get a hold of you. They want to talk to you. They saw you at that show the other day. And he was like, what? And so anyway, the conversation developed, and, he's ended up getting a pub deal just recently with them. out of, and this is like a story you hear in the 90s, like, oh, the A&R guy saw you on the opening set on a Sunday afternoon, and all of a sudden, you got a deal, and it's like, that just doesn't happen anymore. Like, that's
Yeah.
not how it works, and lo and behold, um, it just did happen for Tim that way, and they're interested in working with him. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the deal, but I know that Tim has told me that they're on board with helping him grow, which is what a label should be doing, right? That's what a publisher and a label, that's kind of the original idea of what, labels did for artists was, they came with a little bit of capital and some connections, and then they helped develop the art, and again, his is, I guess, I think, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I think it's a publishing deal, not a record deal, but regardless, it's like they're saying, hey, we believe that you have something to offer as a songwriter, and we want to help you develop that. And so that, that's incredible. And that's all just goes back to the point of, that all happened because Tim is 100% authentic in what he's doing. There's no BS. There's no filter. There's no facade. It's just him living his truth and making great music, and that's what works, So, that's what I always encourage when I'm working with an artist, is to try and find that,
Yeah.
what is it that really is, what are you really trying to say? What are you really doing this for? Tell me the stories of the songs. How do we make the most artistic version of that, that's the truest form of what it is that is in your soul, that you're trying to get out of your body into the world to share with people. And that's kind of the ethos that I try to bring to working with artists and figuring that out. It's more of a, almost a meta thing. There's hundreds of people that can record, and artists can record themselves. I mean, the technology's there. It's not really what it's about, when working with a producer. Now, obviously, I do try to also capture great sounds and make things sound good. And, and it's interesting because I don't produce as much as I used to. A decade ago, I was producing a lot more. Budgets were a little different. People still were doing a lot more live music in recording studios. And these days I don't really get the opportunity to produce as much. People lean on me more to help finish records, as a mixer and a mastering guy even now, So, a lot of times I'm just kind of in the finishing stretches, and I don't get to have that conversation with the artist as much anymore, but I do love doing that. I love, and that's kind of what I got to do with Evan Boyer last year, who I know was just on the show. We kind of got the opportunity to make a record like that, where we really got to dig in,
Yeah.
and kind of unearth what we thought were the best versions of the songs and get really creative on some of them and things like that. So
Yeah, and it sounds great. And I was on your Instagram today, and I saw a really cool term I never heard before. And I hope I didn't get. You described like getting a sound of dark clarity.
yeah,
I love that.
yeah, man. Well, that's I owe the credit to that on my buddy Matthew Scott Ragland, who's kind of an indie artist, more so. He's not a country artist in any manner. He was in a band called Nello that was kind of a popular college band about a decade ago. They played kind of the East Coast colleges a lot, and and then he kind of, that band broke up, and he got into commercial real estate and is, pretty successful in that. But he's got this soul of an artist. I mean, Matt really is like a true artist and a great songwriter. And I had the opportunity during COVID to he made the record, he self-produced it, but I kind of worked real hand in hand with him on finishing it, and especially coming up with some of the sonic landscapes and, what it was. And we kind of defined that because, believe it or not, we mixed that album twice, which doesn't happen very often. But, Matt was so invested in the art of it that, we did some mixes early on that sounded great. And by most people's standards would have been like, oh man, that's awesome. Cool. It's done, put it out or whatever. But Matt had this vision of what he wanted it to sound like. And, he thought that what we had come up with was maybe a little too polished, a little too shiny, a little too, I don't know. He just thought it was maybe a little bright, or maybe a little too big even, Oftentimes people want their records to sound as big as possible, right? Because they're competing with what you were talking about, where some of the stuff on the radio is just completely smashed. I mean, it's, some of it sounds really impressive, but it's really loud and everything's really compressed. And, and he was just like, man, I just want it to be, a little more organic. And we came up with this idea of dark clarity. Like, we didn't want it to be muddy, right? We didn't want it to be muted or muffled or lo-fi, but, so we wanted clarity, but we wanted dark clarity. We didn't want it to feel shiny. And so, and we did that. And so we remixed the album with that ethos in mind, like with that whole objective of dark clarity. And I think we succeeded in that. He was happy, I was happy. It was a real cool creative endeavor. And it was, it was really fun doing that because it also brought us to a whole new level of understanding of each other as friends and as humans. And, when that's really kind of my favorite part about working hand in hand with artists is, when you really get to dig in, you go deep. It's not like a lot of transactional things in this world where you hire somebody to do something and, it's like they do the job and it's like, okay, well, thank you. And here's the payment and whatever. And it's very, surface level. And even if you think they did a good job, it's just like, okay, well, thanks. And on with my day. It's when you really get to work with an artist, in tandem for a common objective, it's almost impossible not to, not only become friends, but kind of really create some kind of bond with that person. I think that's the most beautiful part about this industry, is that the people who make records together a lot of times really love each other, and they really got each other's backs, and those are lasting relationships, and it's meaningful on so many levels, and I just, that's really one of my favorite parts about getting to, kind of really go the distance with an artist, is the humanity of it and the tangibility of the interactions. And even when there's like disagreements of like, oh man, I don't think it should be like that. And, you kind of got to work through these things together to find that magic, That's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it special, and that's what makes it unique. Because if you did that with a different set of people, it would be a different outcome, And so that's what's fun about it, and that's what's great about when an artist has the choice to kind of build a team or when they come to a producer and the producer helps them build a team, that's kind of what it's all about. And that's, I know that Evan, when he was on your show, was talking about like Tim and what Tim brought to that album. And yeah, and that was a very intentional decision on my part to kind of bring Tim into the fold, because I knew that he would add, an element that we didn't have, And Tim and I work really well together when we're in the studio. I mean, we've done enough projects, and we have kind of that, extra sensory communication sometimes of being able to be like, yeah, man, that thing, and he's, you don't have to finish it. Yeah, that thing, and you just kind of dive in and go. It's fun, So.
Yeah, and you guys are both building studios at your own house, right?
Well, yeah, Tim built a really nice recording studio out on his property in Royce City, and I'm currently in the middle of building out a new mix room at a house that I just bought over in Garland, and it's going to actually be a Dolby Atmos capable mix room. And so on Apple Music they have that thing called spatial audio, which when you listen in headphones, it's like a 360 kind of experience. Or if you listen on a home theater, and they'll bring it to more cars in the coming years. But that's all derived from a Dolby Atmos mix environment, the same way they do it in movie theaters. And so I'm building a mix room for myself that has that capability to start offering that, to artists. A lot of the Nashville label artists had their catalogs remixed in Dolby Atmos, and what really the brand is spatial audio for Apple, because Spotify doesn't have an immersive audio, capability yet. Everybody's kind of waiting to see if and what they do with that. I think if Spotify does go the route of doing some immersive audio stuff, that's going to really increase the demand for that format, especially with the independent artists, because the label artists are all already kind of on that. A bunch of my friends that have studios in Nashville, are working on some of that stuff, and most of the major records get mixed in both spatial and stereo now. But it's kind of a new thing, especially for the Texas market and the Texas country artists and the Americana artists and some of those folks. It's like they either don't have access or don't have a reason to do it yet or whatever. But it's going to be cool to have that capability and kind of offer that service, because there's not a lot of that infrastructure here yet. I only know of like 2 other studios in the area that even have the capability of doing it. And it's also something where it's not something that like a quote bedroom studio can just set up that easily, because it's to do it right, you have to have like at least a 12 speaker immersive setup with speakers on the ceiling and things like that. So it's like a 7.1.4 minimum environment, the same way you would have for like a film. And so it's not something that's going to be quite as easy to replicate, for kind of the average home studio owner. So I kind of want to have that as a tool for the area, for people to come use and experiment with and learn that format and just kind of offer that. So that I should have that totally ready and functional by March.
Nice.
It's getting, like we're in like the drywall stages right now. I was soundproofing the room over there. We tore everything out and put new insulation in the walls and hung resilient channel and a couple layers of different materials on the wall so that it's kind of a floating wall, and dampen the floor, and so we're really getting the room more soundproof and getting all those different speaker lines run and clean so that that's going to be available. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I would love to be in a room with 12 speakers.
Yeah, man. Well, you should come on by and check it out, you know?
Yeah, that'd be cool. Now,
Yeah.
now with that, do you mix? I was reading. You mix. You said what? Somebody asked you like, what's the best way to mix? And you said I believe 86 decibels. Is
Oh,
that
well, yeah, I mean that's an interesting, yeah, that's kind of a rabbit hole. I mean there's in the audio world there's a thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve. And basically what that means is that the flattest frequency response for your hearing, in which you're kind of properly hearing bass and properly hearing the high frequencies, um, is actually at like about 83 decibels.
wow?
And that's called the Fletcher-Munson curve. And so if you're listening too quietly when you're mixing, you're going to enhance certain things and, oftentimes make things too bright. And if you're listening too loud, because of the high mid frequencies, your ears try to kind of protect themselves a little bit when things get too loud. And so oftentimes you're going to end up under mixing the high frequencies if you're cranked up too much. Now, I mean, some people, depending on what their background is in the music world, if they're an engineer that also plays live and tours a lot or plays drums or whatever, they might have some hearing loss. And so, who knows? I mean, everybody hears differently. That's what's interesting about hearing too, is, what I have is the quote curve of my hearing is not the same as the next person. And so, but yeah, I have a system that I work in where I monitor, I listen to mastered, records, and I kind of work on my stuff that's going to be at a mastered level around that 83 to 85 dB range. And that, that kind of calibrated, type of monitoring for me has really helped me get consistent mixes, because as I kind of ramped up as a mix engineer and less of a producer recordist, and more of a mixer, over the last decade, it kind of started slow. I was producing and recording a bunch in like the early 2000s and all the way up until about 2012. I was in the studio and oftentimes in big studios for, multiple days a week, working and, working with humans, recording music. And I kind of saw like the turning of the tides a little bit in the early like 2010s, with, all of a sudden Logic got purchased by Apple and, GarageBand started becoming more ubiquitous, and, the Universal Audio interfaces started coming to market. And all of a sudden I saw like, hey, I think a lot of people are going to start recording themselves. And, the virtual instruments, the stuff that's, that sounds real, but it's in the computer. Those started getting a lot better around that, about 15 years, 12, 15 years ago. And so I just kind of was like, man, I don't know if I'm still going to have a gig, So I was like, people might be able to make music, but they're probably not going to be able to mix it. So I kind of started working on getting really good at mixing. And so, which was a long road. It's not easy to get good at, because you can't shortcut it. It's something where you just have to spend a lot of time listening. You have to spend a lot of time training your ears. It's not so much technology that you need to learn. It's more just ear training and kind of understanding what it is you're listening for, what it is that translates, and it just takes time to learn that. But yeah, as I kind of got better and better at it, along the way, the great thing about this industry is, there's a lot of people that are willing to share And along the way, my buddy Rob Burrell, who's a Grammy-winning mixer up in Nashville, I lived up there for a few years, and um, Rob came over to my studio one day, and we got to talking about monitoring, and and he's the one that kind of showed me the right way to calibrate my monitoring, and it kind of changed my life. Really, it changed my outlook on how I was mixing stuff, and it has it's helped me a lot since then. So yeah, I try to pass that knowledge on where I can to other engineers. But yeah, so
Now, as someone that loves capturing sounds and likes producing the best you possibly can, has it been frustrating that so many more people are consuming it and listening to music through phone speakers? Or is that just, you have to adapt?
yeah, I mean, I did have an artist. Um, Probably, I mean, it's been almost 10 years ago now, but it was while I was living in Nashville. I was mixing an artist, and I did have somebody send me a mix revision that said, "Hey man, can you do?" I don't remember what the request was, but it was, "Hey, can you do so and so to the mix or whatever?" Because when we were listening on our phone with it in a bowl on the kitchen table, it sounded like this, and I was like, "What?" I was like, "You want me to revise the mix because you had your phone in a glass bowl on the kitchen table and it sounded a certain way, And, you know, and I mean, look, he may have been right about that regardless of the environment that was listening in. Maybe that's just what made him catch what he was feeling about the mix, but yeah, I found that to be really comical, because I was just like, well, man, could you go listen at least on I mean, let's get to at least the AirPods. I mean,
Yeah, right.
can we at least get it out of the fishbowl and into your ears? But no, I mean, for years, for forever, for all of history, people have been judging mixes in the car. Um, I remember hearing a story. I don't remember which producer this was, but it was one of the big, producers from the 80s and 90s was talking about how back then they used to set up FM transmitters in the studio, out in LA, and they would set it to a certain band, that wasn't used by a radio station, and they would play it back in the studio off the board or have the intern play it, and they'd go ride in the car down the freeway or whatever, listening to the FM transmission so that they could hear what it would sound like over, FM radio, while they were still working on it in the studio. And I was like, man, that's cool. That's a cool idea, you know? So, I mean, we have all kinds of tools now. It's funny because we have all kinds of tools about I can actually have an application where, I can put it on my mix while I'm working and hear how it'll sound in the Ogg Vorbis format that is Spotify. Truth is, I never do that. I don't really care. It's like I mix because I have my own standardized version of monitoring in the studio. I kind of know at this point what's going to translate and what's not. And so I kind of know what's going to translate and what's not. And so I will listen to stuff in my car. It's interesting. Tim and I actually discovered a couple years ago that forever we were using Dropbox, right? It's like I would finish a mix and throw it in Dropbox, and then I'd go open the app in the car and listen to it. And Tim called me up one day and he was like, "Hey man, what's with the distortion on the side channels, when he sings certain words?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "Yeah, there's a crackling thing and it's only on kind of the sides. It's not really in the." I was like, "Well, the singer had kind of a raspy voice." I was like, "Man, it's probably just his voice, And he was like, "Well, he's like, I don't know, man. It doesn't sound that way." And I was like, "Well, I don't really hear it over here, And then I got to thinking about it, and I was like, man, I wonder if it's the app, you know? And so I got on my earbuds, um, and opened up my phone and played it back while I was sitting in the studio on my AirPods, um, over the Dropbox, you know? And sure enough, there was like a crackly distortion on the sides. And I was like, oh my God. And so then I downloaded the file. You know how you can download the actual file to your phone and put it in your documents folder or whatever on your phone. And I did that, and I opened it and I played it, and it wasn't there.
Wow.
And I was like, uh-oh. And so we kind of discovered that the Dropbox web player and phone app are not a one-to-one playback of the master. And so, you know, which was crazy to me because I had been sending out references for years to artists and getting people, you know, because nobody takes the time to download the file these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I literally oftentimes will, like on iMessage on my studio computer, just text, you know, a link to the artist of the finished master, you know, and then they just open that on their phone and listen to it, you know, and hopefully they're streaming it to the car or something and not just like listening over the phone speaker, but you never know. I mean, you know, and I think this runs up and down the chain. I mean, artists, I mean, even probably Taylor Swift is listening to rough mixes in Dropbox, you know what I mean? So it's like, I was just kind of dumbfounded. I was like, man, so much music is being referenced this way and it's not accurate. You know, it's not an accurate representation of the master. And so, you know, I immediately went and found a different app. Right now I'm using an app called Disco, which is what a lot of music supervisors for films use. And it seems to be a more one-to-one playback player. You know, it's like what I hear in the studio is what I get on the app kind of thing. And, you know, so I've started sending out Disco links to the artists that I work with to reference as opposed to Dropbox. I'll still send a Dropbox folder when the project's done, you know, to deliver the assets, but we're not referencing off of that. So yeah, I mean, you know, that's kind of the challenge, right? I mean, it's like we're living in this digital world where everything's like all about immediacy, you know?
Yeah.
When I started, I mean, we were burning CDs and that was the only method of listening to reference a mix. And that's just long gone, you know? It's like, like I said, nobody's even going to download the file, you know? It's like if you send them a Dropbox link, they're going to go to the web player. They're going to open the app. They're not going to download the file. And so, yeah, it's kind of like there's a whole new layer of education that has come with some of this where, you know, artists, you know, it's not just producers and engineers, like artists have to be reasonably tech savvy, you know, to kind of operate in today's world, you know? I mean, whether it's social media and reels and things of that nature, I mean, they're doing their own edits on reels. I mean, some of these people are really good at this stuff, you know, creating all this content. But then even, you know, finding those gotchas, you know, about, and I even noticed like on Instagram, like the original reel, and then if you go to reshare it, it's not going to be as loud. I don't know if you noticed that, but like there's all kinds of weird things going on with these digital replications and, you know, so it's really important to kind of educate artists, you know, of like, hey, you know, okay, I'm going to send you this. It's labeled this. Don't alter the file. Don't put it in any other app. Just upload it to your, you know, distributor and, you know, get it there without altering it in any way. So yeah, there's a little bit of education involved too, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And as for media, like what would be the most accurate representation of what you captured in the studio? Would it be vinyl?
Not necessarily, because if you recorded it digitally, you know what I mean, then, you know, the most accurate representation of what you've captured digitally and then mixed in a DAW is going to be the digital output of that. Oh, something's going on with the lag here.
I don't even, normally it's like a phone call or something. But yeah, I was asking, let's start back because I'm really interested in your answer of, is vinyl the most accurate representation of what you captured at the studio?
Yeah. And, you know, not necessarily. you know, yeah, like I was saying, yeah, if you record into a DAW and you capture it digitally, and then you mix it in the DAW, the most accurate representation of that is going to be the digital output of the DAW, because what happens a lot of times today with vinyl is you're delivering a digital file to the vinyl to the cutting engineer, and so they're kind of converting that back from digital to analog. In the old days when vinyl was like the ubiquitous format, people were recording on tape, and so they were recording through all analog equipment to tape, to multi-track tape, and then they were mixing from multi-track tape to two-track tape, and so for stereo mixdown. And then they would send those two-track tapes to the mastering engineer, and then essentially and effectively to the cutting engineer. So it was analog all the way through the process, back then. So I think that theoretically, if you're recording into a digital domain and you're manipulating things digitally, and then you have that and you convert it back to analog and cut it onto a vinyl, you're actually then getting the sound of the vinyl. The most accurate representation would be the digital, and then the vinyl has its own kind of sound to it. And in the analog days, each medium had its own sound too. It wasn't as though the vinyl sounded exactly like the two-track tape, because the tape formula itself has a sound and the vinyl medium itself has a sound. So but and I think that if somebody was really interested in the purity of recording for the art's sake of it, doing it all analog is, first of all, it's a lot of fun. But I think really for me, the thing that I like best about working on tape and working analog is that you have limitations. That's really the beauty of it to me. And I haven't gotten the opportunity to do a ton of sessions on tape. Tape's expensive. It's slow. Again, it takes a certain kind of artist that is interested in doing that for the artistic reasons. Like from a commercial sense, it makes it's not practical at all. You know what I mean? And most artists are very concerned about budget and time and everything else. So it's like, working on tape is not an option when you're concerned about budget and time. If you're concerned about making cool art and capturing something that sounds a little more unique, that can be a great thing, But when I have worked on tape before, the thing that I actually notice most is that it makes people play different, because they know that it's not as easy to edit, And so I remember it's been a while, but the last time I did a session on tape, everybody came in the studio that day, and I had session players show up to work for this girl. And, everybody sat down and was getting ready, and we were all talking about the song and what we were going to do and all that. And I was like, yeah, man, we're cutting to 24 track today. And everybody's like, we are? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh. And I'm not kidding. The way, the finesse and the intention and the focus in which the players played was different. It was elevated, because they were then actually performing for that moment, knowing that if they weren't all in, that we would likely have to redo the take or whatever. You can splice tape and you can, you can make edits, but it's not the same as being able to be like, oh yeah, let's just nudge this bass note over. Hey, let's quantize these drums or whatever. You have to put it in the computer to do that, whereas, on tape, if you want to capture a great performance, then, you play it, and hopefully you don't edit it. I mean, when you edit on tape, you're usually taking sections of a song, it's like, well, let's take the chorus from this song or this take or whatever. It's not as though you're going, hey man, let's nudge this note here and do, in the digital domain, we're making all kinds of, you know, all kinds of edits all the time. We're manipulating everything, you know, all the time. We're tuning vocals, we're nudging timing, you know, we're melodyning bass parts. We're, you know, I mean, there's just so many things that we can do. And that's part of probably the homogenization that you're talking about too, is, again, the more budget you have and the more money that's going into the record, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes means it's going to be more closely edited and scrutinized and those kinds of things as well. You know, not always, but, you know, a lot of the very, very commercial songs are really, really, really tightened up. And, you know, so, and again, you know, I'm here to serve the artist's intention, you know, and so if the artist, like I just did a really cool album, I just mixed a really cool album for a young guy in town named Julian Moss, and it's like noise rock, you know, it's heavy, it's grungy, you know, he's got all kinds of distortion all over the record, and you know, so you know, it was definitely a thing where we didn't want to clean it up too much. You know, we left a lot of mistakes, we left a lot of background noise in it, you know, because I would offer, I'd say, hey man, do you want me to, like, you know, take out the headphone bleed in between this and that and whatever, and he was like, no, I kind of like it, you know, or whatever. And so, you know, you don't have to do all that, but, you know, and you know, we had the capability, but, you know, a lot of the commercial records are going to be really, really, really cleaned up, you know, and when you're on tape, you're kind of, you know, a little bit more, it is what it is, you know, it's like, unless you drop it in the DAW, you're not going to be able to take out like a little click or a pop or whatever. And, you know, there's going to be a noise floor that's higher. Some people really love that, you know, I mean, that kind of low level hiss, you know, almost sometimes glues the song together in its own weird way, you know. But yeah, the way that people perform on tape, I think, is just completely different. And I think that that's part of the loss, you know, of what's happened with the progression of moving out of analog. It's not just about the sound, you know, I mean, we have ways to make things sound analog, even if they're not, you know. Yeah. I do that all the time where, you know, I'm working towards a more analog-y sound, but I'm using the computer to do it. And, you know, there's virtually every emulation you can imagine out there of all kinds of gear and, you know, transformers and tape and tubes and all the things that we love about, you know, the analog world have been emulated. And you can get into the minutia of arguing about that all day, but at the end of the day, you know, it's about, you know, does this thing move me? Does it create emotion? You know, did it get the feeling that the artist was trying to convey? You know, that's what matters. And, you know, but I do love tape, and I do love working like that when I have the opportunity. So yeah, that's a long answer to that question.
It's a great answer.
So it's really more about the performance, you know. And, you know, and these days, I mean, everybody's cutting vinyl from digital, you know. That's what we did with Evan, you know, that's what Shane did, you know. I mean, it's like we didn't do analog mixes down to tape to cut vinyl, you know. It's coming from the digital master, and it still sounds great, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I know you said you had an hour, Aria.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're pretty close. I mean, I could probably go one more question if you got one, or, you know,
okay.
If you want.
I guess we'll do like a fun one.
Okay.
Like, what's the strangest thing you've used as like a source for an effect or something on a song? Like, I was watching the guy, they did Shine, and he did it in his bathroom with like the cardboard, the paper towel, and he was like, yeah. It's
Oh,
like
okay, really?
something like unique like that. Like it's or like I was watching Steven Tyler of Aerosmith saying they use the sugar packet for the Sweet Emotion. Have
Oh yeah,
you?
as a shaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that. My friend Kurt Biscara, who's a real famous drummer in LA, we've done the sugar packet shaker before. It's great, that's fun. I think one of the most fun things that I did on an album was we were doing a song called Paper Airplanes, and it was kind of a kitschy little indie tune, for this young girl that was just kind of out of high school, and it was kind of in that era of like Ingrid Michaelson and some of those indie pop artists in the late 2000, like 2008, 9, 10 in there. And, so we wanted to do an intro where it sounded like a paper airplane taking off. And so we were over at BPL Studios, which is no longer here in Dallas, unfortunately. It was the studio that was owned by the guys from Deep Blue Something. And it was a rad studio. They had all their touring gear there, all their pedals, and, so much cool stuff to play with in that studio. But we were over there and we found this. It was like I think it was some kind of toy organ that actually had like a fan in it, but it ramped up, like as it came on, and like I don't know if that was part of like the tone generator or what it was, but you clicked it on and it went like it started to rise and ramp up, and you could hear the wind of it too. And so we mic'd up the like fan part of this little toy organ thing, and then so we turned that on, and that was like the airplane engine starting. But of course it didn't sound like a jet, it sounded like a tiny fan, right? So it was perfectly in line with what we were after. And so that ramps up and then gets to its like coasting level of velocity. And then we also overdubbed my buddy Josh, who was the co-producer on the album with me. We set up mics on like over him on top of a piano, on the lid of a piano. He quickly folded up a paper airplane, and made a paper airplane, and then threw it across the studio room. And so you hear him fold it up while the thing's ramping up, the engine is starting, and we're folding up the paper airplane, and then right as the engine gets to full velocity, he throws it and it goes, and then you hear it crash onto the floor in the room, and that's how the album starts. And so that was definitely pretty avant-garde, that was that's one that comes to mind right now. We've definitely done some fun experiments in the studio. Not that it's that unique, but a song that probably a lot of your listeners know and has done really well is that song "All Right" by the Lowdown Drifters. And that song, the kind of 16th note pattern on that is a muted tom, right? It's a like tom with a, I don't remember if it was a calfskin towel or a tea towel or what it was over it. And then the snares turned off on the snare drum, so it's more of the hollow thing. But when we came into the studio that morning, they were kind of warming up and practicing the tune, and he was playing that on the hi-hat originally, and I remember sitting there thinking about it, and I was, Tim was producing this album, I was recording it for him, but I always, Tim and I kind of work in tandem on a lot of stuff, and I remember being like, hey man, why don't we play the hi-hat pattern on the dead tom, and that just like completely changed the vibe of that song, and that's not all that unique because people use tea towels on toms all the time, but just kind of the way that we structured that pattern based around that. I mean, it really sets the mood, for that particular song. And so, like I said, not that unique, but definitely was kind of a big change from what it could have been, and I feel like really kind of the defining factor of the soundscape for that song was that drum part, so
that's cool.
Yeah, man.
Just what simple things can do.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many. I mean, if I thought about it, I mean, there's so many stories, and running this through this or whatever. But some of that gets into the technical minutia of oh, we were overdriving this thing and running into this compressor, and like people that aren't audio engineers don't care about that stuff. Like, but yeah, man. So many fun stories from recording. I mean, I think that's really what it's all about when you get the opportunity to go into the studio, is to try and do something unique and different, and meaningful, and push the envelope in some way, whether that's stretching yourself as a writer, or stretching the sonic landscape of the song, or just trying to think outside the box in some way. I think that's important,
Yeah,
but,
definitely.
Yeah.
And it's endless.
It is. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's kind of the sad tragedy about the commercialism of, the music industry. I mean, you think about, this kind of goes back to your thing about the vinyl as well, is that, back in the 90s, a lot of the records that we love, and some of those rock records and things like that, well, really anything, 90s and before. I mean, a lot of what has made some of that stuff so timeless, in my opinion, is partially the process. It's like, it wasn't easy, to make those records. It wasn't like you could just kind of plug into a $200 interface and make sound. I mean, that has democratized it and made it a lot more accessible to a lot more cool and talented people, and that's a really good thing. But when you spend 6 months in the studio writing and recording, working with the limitations of the format of, well, we have this console and these mics and these amps and this gear and whatever, but we have to come up with something, it's like, and you don't have every plugin known to man and every, virtual instrument and simulator and all these other things. It's like, that makes you work differently, that stretches your brain in different ways because of the limitations. And like I said, when you're working in the analog format, it can force you to play better and to perform better. That's what I find so amazing about some of the records that were done in the analog era, is like, there wasn't any pitch correction, and I know that there were ways to do that too. I mean, some of the old school producers that I've talked to were like, well, yeah, we would get out the Eventide harmonizer and, move things by a few cents here and there, with the Eventide pitch shifting and whatever. So, I mean, there was always like these methodologies, but man, you talk about, that's not auto-tune. That still took a lot of work to do that, and so, so yeah, I just think that there's it's really a double-edged sword, I mean, there's so many benefits to the modern technology and the ability to, for more people to make records and have more access. But there's also kind of a loss of the longer process, and spending the time to really just dig in and, try a bunch of different ways sometimes. A lot of times because of budgets, it's like, well, the first thing that gets recorded is the thing that they end up doing. And, major artists don't always work like that, sometimes, I mean, there might be 6, 7 versions of a song before it's the one that makes it out into the world, and so often I think a lot of the indie artists and people just working on constraints, they just don't have that luxury, to record various versions of things and kind of take it all the way. So that's just the times we're living in,
Yeah.
and the technology does help, kind of keep the cost low and, get more done. But I mean, more is not always better, I mean, there's something like, I read a statistic a few months ago that there's more music being uploaded to Spotify each day. I hope I'm saying this right, but it was in a Music Radar article. More music being uploaded to Spotify each day than the entirety of the releases in 1989.
Wow.
In the whole year, So you can fact check me on that. I might have said it wrong, but it's something like that. I mean, it's just insane. And then, there's the other thing that I've just started recently hearing about that I'm really against, and I think that we all in the industry should take a stand very heavily against, is that Spotify is actually, or allegedly, creating their own music with AI and filling playlists with it. So some of the backgroundy type music that's like chill or lo-fi or whatever, trip hop or whatever, things that are not vocal driven music quite yet. They're using AI so they don't have to pay out royalties to these artists that are trying to compete in those genres. And I think that that's crap, man.
Yeah.
I think that's garbage, it's, I know in the pop world, people are using AI to create new and unique sounds, sometimes even work on like assisting the songwriting process, whatever, I mean, the tools are there, people are going to use them. But, I think kind of, the capitalist, it's all part of the oligarchy taking shape in this nation as we walk into today. Where it's like, Spotify posted record profits last year. It was like $300 billion or something in profit. And it's like they still want to pay. Well, first of all, they stopped paying anyone who hasn't streamed at least 1,000 streams. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So it's like if you don't stream 1,000 streams, you get nothing. Not that that would pay anything anyway. It's, I mean, you're really not making any money at all until you hit 1 million streams. Let's be real. I mean, it's like, at point whatever 004, 4 cents. It's $4,000 give or take per million streams. And obviously that can differ if you're with a major distributor and whatever. There's all kinds of little preferences and so on and so forth. But, the idea that they're posting, $300 billion or whatever in profit, and their CEOs and technology chief officers and all of them are taking millions and millions and millions of dollars in salaries, off the backs of working artists that are struggling to survive. And the CEO of Spotify was on record last year saying the cost of creating content is nearly zero, and that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true, because even if you're using free tools to do it, your time is worth money, or your time is worth something.
Yeah.
Your time is valuable, and your art is valuable. And so, to kind of say that, slap in the face of all these creators, and say that it costs nothing and therefore we shouldn't have to pay you for it, no. And we should take a stand. I mean, honestly, I feel like, I follow some people that are, more bigger, record industry managers and executives, and some of these people are starting to, really get riled up about this Spotify, it's the wealth inequality that is plaguing America on all levels,
Yeah.
but it's like, but just on our little microcosm, this is a great example of that wealth inequity. Um, and, you know, um, yeah, so it's like, I feel like there's, there's some people that actually have some influence that are starting to, take note of this. And I mean, I feel like we should unionize, I feel like that, like somehow, some way, you know, artists should unionize. Or if it's a situation where, um, you know, uh, Spotify's not the answer, then, you know, we need to get smart as an industry and create an ecosystem that works for us,
Yeah.
and, I mean, the tools are out there. I mean, obviously the challenge is the public interface. It's like people like Spotify because of the ease of use. It's like, well, sure, I'll pay $10 a month for all the music in the world, and that's a great business model. But if they're posting $300 billion in profit, it's time to start paying the creators more.
Yeah.
And that's really all there is to it. Because without the creators, they are nothing, and they're trying to circumvent that with the AI and say, oh, well, we don't need the creators either. But the truth is, as we started the discussion with, humans will hear through the bullshit. It's like the authenticity is what is the connective thread in music. That's why people are moved by it. That's why people listen to music. That's why it changes people's lives on a daily basis. It's why it's the soundtrack to your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions and your memories and everything else, is because, it is a metaphysical way of humans connecting. And I don't believe that can be replaced by machines. So,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, man.
It's got to have soul.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
I know you got to get rolling, but
I do.
that was a great conversation, and I love hearing it from the other side of the window of
Yeah, man. Well,
what's going on.
the other side of the glass.
Yeah,
Yeah, man.
but yeah,
Well, sure.
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I
No.
just appreciate you taking the time to.
Yeah, I was
to
gonna
do
say
this.
the same. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and happy to have the conversation anytime. So,
Nice. Yeah.
yeah, and anybody can find me on Instagram. At ProMix Engineer, and yeah. So thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
Yep. Have a good rest of your night, man.
You too.